June 6, 1944, 1:14 a.m. Above the blacked-out fields of Normandy, the night sky tore open as 13,100 American paratroopers hurled themselves into history. Their parachutes snapped hard against the wind, men twisted in their harnesses, and tracer fire clawed up from the ground like molten lightning. C-47 transport planes burned in the air. Entire stick groups were scattered by flak and violent crosswinds, dropped miles from their landing zones before they even knew they were lost. They hit the ground heavy, crushed by 88 pounds of gear, slammed into dirt and stone, alone in enemy territory. Most were nowhere near their units. Some were missing radios, others lost their explosives. Many were already under German fire before they could even unclip their chutes. But the worst problem wasn't the chaos or the enemy, it was their rifles. Standard U.S. Army doctrine said their primary weapon system worked flawlessly. Land, open the Griswold bag, assemble the broken-down M1 Garand, and return fire in 40 seconds. Perfect, on paper. But Normandy was not a training field. In the darkness, with adrenaline-shaking hands and bullets already snapping through the hedgerows, paratroopers discovered the brutal truth. They did not have 40 seconds. The Germans only needed 10. And in those first seconds after landing, as men fought for their lives in the dark fields of France, America learned that a weapon that works in theory can get you killed in reality. The U.S. Army had spent years perfecting airborne tactics on chalkboards and training fields. Engineers had designed procedures. Commanders had rehearsed them. Manuals had been signed off. According to doctrine, everything worked. A paratrooper would land, open his Griswold bag, connect the 3 pieces of his disassembled M1 Garand, lock the receiver into place, insert an 8-round en-bloc clip, rack the bolt, and be combat ready. The Ordnance Department timed it. 40 seconds from start to finish. Efficient, repeatable, reliable. Except none of that survived contact with reality. In training jumps, men discovered how easy it was for that neat system to fall apart. Griswold bags tore away during descents. Rifle parts spilled into the night. Canvas straps tangled. Divided rifle components were lost in swampy fields, hedgerows, and tree lines. Soldiers hit the ground already being shot at, but instead of firing back, they were on their knees desperately threading rifle barrels in the dark. Meanwhile, opposition forces weren't waiting politely for Americans to assemble their weapons. They closed the distance fast, 10 seconds at most. Close enough for grenades, close enough for bayonets, close enough that a disassembled rifle was no weapon at all. The Army had a problem that couldn't be solved with more training or stricter discipline. It wasn't human error, it was design failure. Somewhere between engineering blueprints and battlefield execution, the system broke. A weapon that looked perfect on schematics was getting soldiers killed, and the Army had just 1 year to solve the problem, or send thousands of paratroopers into combat with a weapon that might as well have been unloaded. The crisis didn't begin in Normandy. The warning signs were already clear 2 years earlier at Fort Benning, Georgia. In 1942, as America rushed to build its first airborne divisions, paratroopers trained relentlessly on mock drop zones. They drilled for night jumps, practiced equipment rigging, and rehearsed assembly of their primary weapon, the M1 Garand. It was General George Patton's pride, the rifle he called the greatest battle implement ever devised. And for regular infantry, it was. At 43.6 inches long and weighing over 9 pounds, it was accurate, powerful, and reliable. But in the cramped door of a C-47, it was a liability. Each paratrooper already carried nearly 40 kilograms of gear: grenades, rations, ammunition, entrenching tools, medical kits, explosives, and 2 parachutes. There was no way to jump safely with a full-length battle rifle slung across the body, so the Army came up with a workaround. Break the rifle into pieces and pack it inside a cushioned carrier, the Griswold bag. In theory, it made sense. In practice, it was a disaster. During training drops, Garands caught on door frames, smacked helmets on exit, and tore loose from harnesses. Paratroopers hit the ground and scrambled for cover, only to discover their rifles trapped behind buckles and canvas. Worse still, some men landed under fire with a rifle that was, in that moment, nothing more than 3 useless steel fragments. Across the Atlantic, Germany had already demonstrated what airborne warfare required. Speed, violence, shock. Paratroopers had seconds to fight after landing, not minutes. The German Fallschirmjäger jumped with weapons ready to go. American doctrine still assumed assembly time. Every drop at Fort Benning was a reminder. The system might work on paper, but men were going to die using it. The Army needed a weapon built for airborne combat, not improvised for it. The first real breakthrough came not from theory, but from desperation. The Army Ordnance Department issued an urgent requirement: develop a new personal defense weapon, something more powerful than a pistol, lighter than a rifle, and compact enough to carry into combat without slowing a paratrooper down. In 1941, the answer arrived, the M1 Carbine. It wasn't meant to replace the Garand, but to fill a deadly gap. At just 5.2 pounds and 35.6 inches long, it was nearly half the weight and much shorter than the Garand. It fired the .30 carbine round, lighter than the .3006 of the Garand, but still capable of accurate fire out to 300 yards. Most importantly, it fed from a 15-round detachable magazine, giving paratroopers more sustained fire than the Garand's 8-round clip. It was fast to handle, easy to carry, and deadly enough for close-quarters combat behind enemy lines. Production exploded. Over 6 million M1 carbines would be produced during the war, more than any other American firearm. For the first time, paratroopers had a weapon that didn't feel like an anchor tied to their chest. But there was still one problem. Even at 35.6 inches long, the carbine was awkward in the confined jump door of a C-47. It still snagged parachute lines, still pointed like a spear in tight airplane cabins, still had to be slung across the body or tied down in a way that slowed soldiers after landing. The M1 carbine was close to the solution, but not close enough. Paratroopers didn't just need a lighter rifle. They needed one that transformed in mid-mission from compact to combat ready, instantly. And so, in early 1942, the Army issued a new request, one that would change airborne warfare forever. Build a carbine with a folding stock, make it small enough to jump with, make it deadly enough to fight with, and make it ready to fire the second boots hit the ground. The Army's order was urgent and brutal in its simplicity. Take the M1 carbine's performance, shrink its footprint for parachute operations, and make sure it could be brought into action instantly after landing. The stakes were existential. Airborne divisions were forming at a furious pace. The 82nd and 101st were training for operations that might come within months. Every week without a solution meant more paratroopers jumping into combat armed with a liability. 3 manufacturers answered the call. 2 proposals were dismissed without fanfare. The Army didn't have time for gentle rework or endless negotiation. The third submission came from the least likely corner, Inland Manufacturing, an auto industry contractor in Dayton, Ohio. They hadn't been in the rifle business for a lifetime. They made steering wheels and car parts, but they had a different kind of expertise, designing for mass production, for parts that worked under real-world abuse, for mechanisms meant to be used by people under stress, not tinkered with by trained technicians. Inland's engineers sketched a deceptively simple idea: keep the proven M1 carbine action, but give it a folding stock that would ride compact during the jump and snap into place the moment a soldier needed it. No complicated locks, no fragile catches, just a spring-loaded wire butt that folded to the left and sprang open when pushed. They submitted initial drawings in March 1942. The Ordnance Department requested changes. Inland revised. On April 29, 1942, the revised plan was recommended. By May 12th, it was formally approved. From concept to official adoption in just 2 months. Wartime speed that left no room for indecision. But approval on paper didn't guarantee survival on the battlefield. The weapon would still have to prove itself where it mattered most, under enemy fire, with men scattered, exhausted, and terrified. And Inland had 6 months to do it.
Inland Manufacturing didn't look like a savior of American paratroopers. Before the war, they weren't designing rifles or military weapons. They were building automobile parts in Dayton, Ohio, steering wheels, dashboards, interior fittings. Nothing glamorous, nothing lethal. But that was exactly why they were different. By 1942, Inland had already become one of the largest producers of the standard M1 carbine. They understood how to take a design and turn it into a weapon that could survive brutal field conditions and still be built by the hundreds of thousands. Their engineers didn't think like gunsmiths obsessed with precision craftsmanship. They thought like industrial problem solvers. People who knew how to build machines that had to work not just on day one, but 5 years later after weather, grime, and abuse had hammered them. Their philosophy could be summed up in one rule: don't design for the prototype, design for the 10,000th unit. Where traditional small arms designers chased perfection in controlled environments, Inland focused on a more useful target: consistency under chaos. They built things that average soldiers could use in bad conditions, with cold hands and adrenaline-shaking nerves. They didn't care about elegance. They cared about what worked. So when the Army called for a compact, rugged folding weapon stock for airborne forces, Inland didn't try to reinvent firearms. Instead, they did something smarter. They engineered simplicity. Their folding stock didn't transform the M1 Carbine into some exotic weapon. It didn't change the caliber, the mechanics, or how it fired. It just made it fit the real life of a paratrooper: tight in the jump door, safe in the fall, fast to deploy, and instantly ready. This wasn't gunsmithing brilliance. This was industrial survival instinct. Inland's breakthrough wasn't a clever mechanical trick so much as a shift in thinking. Whereas traditional gun designers chased mechanical elegance and tight tolerances, Inland's engineers asked a different question: what will still work when everything else has failed? They brought automotive pragmatism to a weapons problem. That meant choosing proven components, favoring simple, robust mechanisms, and designing for the average soldier in the field, not the engineer in the workshop. Their priorities were clear: minimal moving parts. Fewer pieces mean fewer breakage points. Instant usability. Deploy in seconds without fumbling. Repairable with basic tools or improvised fixes. Manufacturable at scale with consistent tolerances. The result was almost embarrassingly simple: a spring-loaded wire butt that folded to the side and snapped open when needed. There was no complicated latch to freeze in the mud, no safety catch to fumble in the dark, no delicate mechanism that required careful maintenance. The stock's cam and spring arrangement held it in place by force, not by a hook or lever. That lack of a locking mechanism made some ordnance officers nervous. Why rely on a spring instead of a solid lock? Inland answered with evidence. A lock adds moving parts and failure modes. A strong, spring-loaded cam adds speed and reliability. Every material and assembly choice echoed automotive logic. Rivets were the same kind used on brake shoes. The wooden grip was produced with furniture techniques. The leather cheekpiece borrowed upholstery methods. Each small decision favored durability, easy repair, and mass production. It looked crude beside the high-polish world of bespoke firearms. But in the field, crude often beat elegant. Inland didn't invent a miracle. They removed the things most likely to break, and in doing so created something that, in combat, simply did its job. Turning Inland's drawings into thousands of combat-ready guns was an exercise in industrial common sense more than gunsmith showmanship. Inland leaned on specialist contractors for parts familiar to the auto and furniture trades. S.E. Overton of South Haven, Michigan cut and finished the wooden pistol grips and cheek pieces using furniture-making techniques. Royal Typewriter in Hartford stamped and bent the spring wire buttstocks and at first oversaw stock assembly. Components arrived at Inland's Dayton plant, and the M1 Carbine actions, the receiver, barrel, bolt, trigger group, were taken straight off the standard production line and mated to the new folding stocks. Mechanically, nothing about the carbine's firing system changed. The M1A1 was the exact same action, only dressed in a different, airborne-friendly frame. Assembly was brutally straightforward by design. There wasn't a separate model number or a special serial run for the M1A1. The weapons carried whatever Inland serials came to the folding stock station. That decision eased logistics. Armorers who already knew the M1 Carbine could service the M1A1 with no new training. Spare parts were interchangeable, and ammunition was identical. There were hiccups. Royal Typewriter struggled initially with the folding stock assembly process, creating a production bottleneck in mid-1942. When that happened, S.E. Overton stepped in and assumed full assembly duties, smoothing the pipeline without bureaucratic drama. The choice to use off-the-shelf, proven components, brake shoe rivets for fasteners, upholstery leather for the cheek rest, meant parts were cheap, rugged, and field repairable. Shipments began in October 1942, and in the year that followed, roughly 71,000 M1A1s left inland's lines for the 82nd and 101st Airborne. The production method wasn't glamorous, but it was exactly what the Army needed: repeatable, maintainable, and fast. When the first M1A1 carbines began rolling out to the 82nd and 101st in October 1942, they didn't arrive alone. Inland shipped a simple kit of airborne accoutrements: a padded canvas jump scabbard meant to cradle the folded carbine against a paratrooper's belt, a top attachment to the pistol belt, and a bottom leg strap to keep the weapon from swinging during the drop. The idea was tidy on paper: strap the folded 25-inch carbine close to the body, survive the violent exit and opening shock, and have a ready rifle the instant you hit the ground. In practice, combat training and early drops quickly rewrote the manual. The leg strap almost never saw regular use. Paratroopers reported it could act like a noose at touchdown. 88 pounds of kit plus body weight slamming into earth at speed, with a folded carbine anchored to the ankle. Forces concentrated through that strap produced broken legs and twisted knees. The physics were merciless and immediate. A device designed to keep the rifle secure could instead compound injury. So the men adapted. They stuffed the folded carbine behind their reserve chute, clipped it to harness straps, or carried it across their chest. Some invented chest slings. Others tucked the weapon into improvised pouches. These field fixes were unofficial, technically prohibited, but the Army didn't stop them. Combat is a relentless test of practicality, and soldiers will always choose what keeps them alive over what's written in a manual. Crucially, the M1A1 itself survived the abuse of parachute openings and hard landings. The spring cam held the stock during the shock of descent, and the wire butt snapped open with a single hand when a man needed it. That reliability, paired with the paratroopers' practical carry solutions, meant more men hit the ground with a functioning weapon than had in earlier operations. The jump scabbard was a good idea that failed where it counted. The M1A1's real victory came from the way troops made the weapon their own in the field. The M1A1's baptism by fire came in the black of July 1943, when American airborne forces leapt into Sicily. Drops were chaotic. Men tumbled out into olive groves and ridgelines, often alone, cut off from their units and under immediate enemy threat. This was exactly the scenario the Army had feared: isolated soldiers who had to fight the instant they hit the dirt. Where earlier doctrines expected soldiers to kneel and reassemble rifles, men with M1A1s did something different. They landed, snapped the folding stock open with one hand, chambered around, and returned fire in seconds. There were no loose barrels, no torn canvas bags to fumble with, just a single compact motion that turned a jump-ready weapon into a fighting rifle. Combat reports and after-action accounts from Sicily were blunt. The M1A1 worked. The spring-loaded cam held during violent parachute openings. The wire buttstock took recoil without collapsing. Soldiers reported being able to set up defensive positions faster, move through broken terrain more quickly, and deliver accurate fire where it counted. In short, the carbine didn't just survive the jump. It let men survive the jump. Sicily didn't end the war, but it validated inland's approach. The M1A1 had moved beyond prototype and into proof, a simple, reliable tool that met the brutal tests of airborne combat. Still, if Sicily was validation, Normandy would be the final exam.
June 6th, 1944. Just after 1 a.m., the largest airborne assault in history crossed the French coast. A storm of flak tore through the night as 13,100 paratroopers from the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions jumped into Normandy. The invasion plan expected organized landings and fast assembly. Reality delivered chaos. Low clouds forced pilots to climb or dive blindly to avoid mid-air collisions. German anti-aircraft fire scattered entire formations. Paratroopers, who were supposed to land together in tight units, were instead flung across the countryside, some sometimes alone, often miles from their objectives, surrounded by enemy patrols. And yet, the real disaster unfolded on the ground. The violent parachute drops ripped equipment from harnesses. Tie-downs snapped. Griswold bags disappeared into the dark. Ammunition pouches, demolition charges. Even entire weapons were lost before boots ever touched soil. Men hit the ground disoriented, overloaded, and already under fire. But those who carried the new M1A1 Carbine had one crucial advantage. Their weapon was ready. No assembly. No hunting through the grass for lost rifle parts. No helpless seconds wasted threading a barrel while the enemy closed in. With the stock folded, the M1A1 rode tight against the paratrooper's body. On landing, one motion brought it to life. Stock open, round-chambered, firing in seconds. At Bracourt Manor, Lieutenant Richard Winters and Easy Company of the 506 used M1A1 carbines to suppress German artillery crews firing on Utah Beach. Fast handling and accurate, the little carbine was ideal for maneuvering through hedgerows and flanking enemy guns. On D-Day, fire superiority didn't come from heavy weapons. It came from whoever could shoot first. The M1A1 gave American paratroopers that edge. Photographs from Omaha Beach even show infantrymen, men who weren't supposed to have them, carrying M1A1 carbines. How did they get them? Simple. In combat, weapons migrate to where they're needed most, and the M1A1 was needed everywhere. That day came with a price: 2,499 American paratrooper casualties. 17 out of 18 battalion commanders in the 82nd Airborne were killed or wounded. The drops were worse than anyone expected, but without the M1A1, the losses would have been far worse. Because on D-Day, survival began with one question: did you land with a weapon you could fire immediately or not at all? Normandy proved a brutal truth. Airborne warfare wasn't decided by range or firepower. It was decided by seconds. A scattered paratrooper landing alone in a hedgerow field didn't need a rifle that could hit targets at 500 yards. He needed something he could bring into the fight before the enemy found him. That's where the M1A1 dominated. The carbine wasn't designed to be a long-range battle rifle like the M1 Garand. Its effective range, about 300 yards, was tailored to the reality of Normandy's bocage country: close-range ambushes, fast engagements, and brutal hedgerow firefights. The lightweight design let paratroopers move faster through fields and over hedgerow banks, making them harder targets to pin down. With a full 15-round magazine, they could suppress German patrols long enough to maneuver or break contact. German reports collected after D-Day revealed an unexpected frustration. They thought American paratroopers would panic when dropped out of position, but instead, they organized. Even isolated groups of 2 or 3 Americans fought like squads because the M1A1 gave them the one thing scattered soldiers needed most: time. Time to reach cover, time to link up with others, time to turn survival into resistance. And because the M1A1 used the same action as the standard M1 Carbine, it handled mud, rain, and rough landings without mechanical drama. No frozen bolts, no complicated latches, no fragile parts to bend or break. The folding stock didn't loosen. The spring-loaded cam didn't fail. The thing just worked. The M1A1 wasn't perfect, but in the close, violent reality of airborne combat, it was close enough, and close enough saves lives. The M1A1 didn't fade after Normandy. It became standard issue for American airborne forces for the rest of the war, jumping into every major combat drop that followed. In September 1944, it went back to war over the Netherlands during Operation Market Garden, the second largest airborne assault in history. The mission aimed to seize a highway of bridges deep inside enemy territory and end the war by Christmas. Instead, Allied planners underestimated German strength, and the operation stalled one bridge too far at Arnhem. But while Market Garden exposed strategic overconfidence, it did something else too. It reaffirmed the M1A1's tactical value. American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st found themselves fighting German armor and SS troops with little support. They were outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded. But they were not unarmed. They didn't waste time assembling rifles. They didn't lose precious seconds fumbling for weapons on landing. They hit the ground firing, again. 6 months later, in March 1945, the M1A1 made its final combat jump in Europe during Operation Varsity, the assault across the Rhine River into Germany. It was the last great airborne operation of the war, and once more the folding stock carbine was there, doing exactly what it had been built to do, turned scattered landings into organized combat. From Sicily to Normandy, from the Netherlands to Germany, the weapon proved itself in every terrain: mountains, hedgerows, flooded fields, and ruined cities. Mud, sand, shock, water. None of it stopped the M1A1. War reveals truth through failure, but the M1A1 survived the war with its reputation intact, not because it was perfect, but because it never pretended to be more than what paratroopers needed, a weapon that worked now. The M1A1 was unusual among American wartime weapons, not for how many were made, but for who made them. In an era when nearly every successful firearm was manufactured by multiple companies to meet wartime demand, the folding stock carbine came from one place and one place only: inland manufacturing of General Motors. 140,591 M1A1 carbines were built during World War II. Every single one came from inland. Compare that to other standard U.S. firearms: the M1 Garand, built by Springfield Armory, Winchester, Harrington and Richardson, and International Harvester; the standard M1 Carbine, produced by 10 different companies: IBM, Rock-Ola, Underwood Typewriter, and others; the .45 Thompson submachine gun, also produced by multiple contractors. So why did the M1A1 remain a one-company weapon? Speed and specialization. The folding stock required a unique supply chain: wood from Overton, wire frames from Royal Typewriter, automotive rivets, leather cheek pads, all flowing smoothly into inland's assembly lines. There was no time to train second-source factories in replicating that system. The weapon was approved in May 1942 and already shipping to combat units by October. Inland had momentum, control of subcontractors, and tooling already set up. Adding more manufacturers would have slowed production, not increased it. The result was unexpected. Quality control stayed remarkably high. Since all M1A1s came from one factory, tolerances remained consistent across all 140,000 units. Armorers in the field trusted the gun because they knew exactly what they were getting. No compatibility surprises, no contractor variations, no headaches. One company, one standard, one mission. Give every paratrooper the same reliable advantage. On paper, the M1 Garand was the superior weapon in nearly every category. It fired the powerful .30-06 Springfield cartridge capable of dropping an enemy at 500 yards. It was deadly accurate, rugged, and praised by none other than General George S. Patton as the greatest battle implement ever devised. For ground infantry, he was right. But for airborne troops, the Garand was the wrong answer to the right question. The Garand weighed nearly 9.5 pounds, almost twice as much as the 5.2-pound M1A1 Carbine. It stretched over 43 inches long, 18 inches longer than the Carbine with its stock unfolded, and nearly 19 inches longer than the Carbine folded. Its power came at the price of size and weight, and in a jump at 120 miles per hour with 88 pounds of equipment already strapped on, size and weight killed. The mission of a paratrooper wasn't to deliver long-range rifle fire. It was to survive violent airborne drops, form small fighting groups behind enemy lines, and win close-range engagements in darkness and confusion. They didn't need the rifle with the most stopping power. They needed the rifle they could fire first. The M1A1 wasn't trying to compete with the Garand. It was solving a different problem entirely. It was the right weapon for the real mission: light enough to jump with, compact enough not to kill you on exit, fast enough to deploy under fire, accurate enough for hedgerow combat, reliable enough to survive a bad landing. The Garand was a weapon of power. The M1A1 was a weapon of survival. And for paratroopers, survival was the mission. The story of the M1A1 didn't end when the last shots of World War II faded. Like many good tools of war, it outlived the conflict that created it. After 1945, the United States began distributing surplus weapons to allies through military aid programs, and the folding stock carbine found new wars to fight. French paratroopers carried it in Indochina during the First Indochina War, including the brutal siege of Dien Bien Phu in 1954. In the dense jungles and ambush terrain of Southeast Asia, the M1A1's compact profile once again made it a natural fit for airborne troops and light infantry. The weapon reappeared in American hands a decade later. Early in the Vietnam War, U.S. Special Forces and South Vietnamese units used M1A1s for reconnaissance missions, helicopter insertions, and jungle patrols. The logic hadn't changed. Mobility and speed still won fights at close range, and the carbine still delivered both. In the post-war years, many countries continued to use or modify M1 carbines, and some even produced new folding stock variants, inspired by the original M1A1. Inland's simple design had sparked a concept far bigger than itself: the compact, fast-handling combat carbine, a weapon class that still exists today. By the time newer designs like the M16 began to replace it, the M1A1 had already served across 3 continents, in 3 wars, and in the hands of soldiers from dozens of nations. Its battlefield relevance lasted far longer than anyone expected in 1942. Because battlefield problems don't disappear, they evolve, and the best designs evolve with them. No weapon is perfect, and the M1A1 was no exception. Its biggest limitation wasn't a mystery to the engineers who built it. It was baked into the design from the beginning. The folding wire stock, so essential for jump use, simply wasn't built to handle the enormous recoil of rifle grenades. The standard M1 Garand could launch grenades safely thanks to its solid wooden stock, which absorbed the shock. The M1A1's wire frame could bend, deform, or even snap under that kind of force. Army regulations acknowledged the problem outright. Paratroopers were instructed not to fire rifle grenades from the M1A1 except in emergencies. Even then, manuals recommended folding the stock, planting the pistol grip into the ground, and letting the earth absorb the recoil instead of the stock. Critics saw this as a flaw. Inland did not. It was a trade-off, intentional and necessary. Engineering is compromise. Inland could have built a grenade-friendly folding stock, but doing so would have meant heavier materials, more parts, and more complexity. Those additions would have made the weapon slower to deploy, harder to produce, and less reliable after a parachute landing. So they chose what mattered most. Grenades were useful, but instant, reliable fire after landing was essential. And in the brutal mathematics of airborne combat, essential wins. This wasn't a weakness. It was disciplined design. When historians talk about legendary weapons, they often celebrate innovation, new technology, superior firepower, revolutionary mechanics. The M1A1 doesn't fit that mold. It didn't win because it was advanced. It won because it was honest. It solved exactly one problem, and solved it completely. Airborne warfare demanded a weapon that could be carried through violent parachute deployment and fired within seconds of landing. That was it. Inland didn't try to turn the M1A1 into something else. They didn't chase perfection or features or prestige. They chased reliability, and that restraint saved lives. Across 140,591 folding stock carbines produced, there were no experimental gimmicks, no redesigns mid-war, no confusing variants. Every one of them had the same spring-loaded cam, the same brake shoe rivets, the same rough wire-frame stock that looked fragile but never failed. Built by factory workers who had spent their careers making car parts, not guns, every carbine rolled off the line with a single purpose: work every time. The true legacy of the M1A1 isn't that it changed firearms technology. It proved something bigger. That simplicity is a weapon in itself. Overcomplicated tools die in real war. Simple ones endure. The M1A1 didn't try to do everything. It did the one thing paratroopers needed most. And because of that, thousands of them came home. From dusty test drops at Fort Benning to the hedgerow firefights of Normandy, from the frozen fields of Holland to the Rhine crossing into Germany, one truth followed American airborne units across every battlefield. Survival is a race measured in seconds, and in that race, the M1A1 gave paratroopers a fighting chance. It was never meant to replace the M1 Garand, and it never tried to. It didn't dominate with long-range power or technical brilliance. It wasn't built for prestige. It was built for purpose. It answered a simple, deadly question. When a man lands alone, in the dark, under fire, does his weapon work? For 140,591 American paratroopers, the answer was yes. Approved in May 1942, first delivered in October, fighting in Sicily by July 1943, saving lives in Normandy by June 1944, still in combat by March 1945. Designed by automotive engineers who had never built a rifle before the war. It shouldn't have succeeded, but it did, because it obeyed a principle too many designers forget. The best weapon isn't the most complex. It isn't the most powerful. It's the one that works every time, especially when everything else goes wrong. The M1A1 folding carbine wasn't just a weapon. It was proof that clarity beats complexity, that doing one thing well beats doing many things poorly, that the simplest machine can be the difference between a name carved into a headstone and a soldier who made it home.